Hi there. We'd like to welcome you to the virtual kitchen table. We are Erin from Everlearning, Haley from Taking a Kinder Path, and myself, Ashley from Ashley as Mama and Storytime Shelves. We're gathering to have conversations about family life and home education, most specifically unschooling, which is sometimes known as self-directed education, or as I often refer to it, consent-based learning. We'll be sharing experiences and ideas, learning as we go. We hope you'll pull a chair up to the table and join us.
Welcome back to the virtual kitchen table. It's Erin here today, and Ashley and Haley's back. We missed you, Haley, for our last conversation. So nice to have you back again. And
I missed you guys too.
I know it was sad. It was sad not to have you. So it's really nice to have you back. And we have Esther Jones today chatting with us as well. And I'm excited about that. We've each had an opportunity to be on Esther's podcast. And so this is just really fun to have Esther joining in today. And our topic today is deschooling, but deschooling imperfectly. So, I guess we'll kind of each talk about what that means to us, but I guess in the way that I've been thinking of it, it's this thought that deschooling is not a linear process necessarily. It's not just, you kind of keep evolving and eventually you reach the end. I think once we get into it, most of us realize that there are quite a few twists and turns. But I also think that there can be, maybe we put some pressure on ourselves, or maybe other people put pressure on us. I don't know. We can talk a bit about that. To really kind of dive into this life of living and learning alongside our kids. And of course, we're still going to have some of those old thoughts that pop up. And for me, I think one of the things that kind of initiated the thoughts around this conversation in particular, my daughter's taking a kind of a formal provincial course right now. And once again, these thoughts, I find things coming out of my mouth and thoughts that I'm having that, I would have thought maybe I'd worked through or that I wouldn't be having anymore. So yeah, it's just sort of interesting to me how, different stages of life, some of these things pop up again, different contexts. For me, I notice that if my kids are doing something that's a little bit more formal, I'm not meaning to, but those kind of old assumptions often come to the surface again. So that's been interesting to me. The other thing that's been interesting to me is to see how those thoughts haven't necessarily phased my kids. They will often still hold their own in their kind of, unschoolish or deschoolish ways. And that's just kind of fascinating to me that I can hold on to a lot of those old beliefs that are harder for me to work through. But I don't know. It's just, they can still kind of hold their own and really have a strong sense of themselves. And so I got thinking about the fact that I think a lot of this is about intention rather than perfection. So, when we're consistently kind of reflecting and just really trying to put our best foot forward as far as, as I said, this kind of living and learning alongside our kids, I think it goes further than we might think it does. And I think that intention can kind of override the odd misstep here or there that we might have. So yeah, so I'm just kind of curious today to see what other people think about this, looking at our own deschooling journeys, maybe kind of looking at that in relation to our children's journeys. And I just thought Esther would be a really good person to join us today because I know Esther's done some deschooling workshops with parents. And I just always really enjoy reading and listening to some of the pieces, even if they're not specifically about deschooling, Esther, that sometimes are just woven in to your conversations with people. So, if you want to talk a little bit more about that, Esther, that's great. Or if somebody else wants to jump in, that's fine too.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me today. Lovely to be with you all. So for me, I think Yeah, I agree very much with what you're saying. For me, it's bringing that intentionality to it. So I think our deschooling is this long evolving process. And for me, it's all about curiosity. So it's about coming to everything with curiosity and knowing that I don't know the answer pretty much ever. So it's sort of allowing life to sort of unfold rather than knowing what's coming. And I think that's quite hard for adults and parents because we're so conditioned that we should be in control, that we can make things happen. But to watch this other human being sort of becoming, do you know what I mean? Like living into their full selves with you is just such a joy. And so I think that I've enjoyed it so much. What I see when I do let go, that I've become much better at letting go. But I do recognize what you're saying about those moments. But I think those moments when we kind of tense up or we can feel ourselves, we can feel that resistance, right? Even in the body, you feel resistant to something that's happening. I think those are the learning moments. And I think we should say, yeah, fantastic, here it is. Ooh, what is it? You know, like I think if we weren't having those moments, there'd be no progress. But every time a moment comes, again, just being curious and thinking, well, why am I feeling like this? Or why am I trying to make this happen in the way I want it to? So I think the moments are part of the journey. We should never be worried about them. I think they're the most natural thing in the world and to be embraced, really, because that's where we're going to move forward just that little bit more, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It does. And I think about the idea that, the idea of perfectly deschooling is actually an oxymoron, right? The idea that we could achieve this perfect state of complete mental freedom around learning and living is ironically kind of that schoolish thought that this is something that we have to meet.
Right.
And it's interesting that you talk about, feeling it in your body, because that is the first clue for me. Anytime that I've been partnering with my child on something, or maybe, working on something, and I can feel a difference if it's something that is externally. So for example, like a provincial credit, or even like sometimes like a permission form or for an activity or something, I can feel just kind of like in my chest, in my throat, it feels different than when we're going about our lives and we're kind of learning in ways that we've chosen, where there's no, we're not doing it for somebody else. There's not that sort of external factor. So I'm sure for different people, it may be different, but for me, I really notice that trigger is if we're doing something to hand back to somebody, or, a form. But I did start to really pick up on that a couple of years ago, this feeling that I would get, almost like a tightening of my chest. And I was like, oh, this really is interesting, that my body does something different when there's like an external expectation. Yeah. That's
just one final thing, because I'd love to hear from the others as well. But I'm feeling that with my older two now, who are doing exams. They've chosen to take some qualifications and some exams, and I can definitely feel that sometimes that's an external pressure added to our relationship. And it's almost like a third person in the relationship. Like, well, how do we bring this in? How do we navigate this together? Like, what is this? So I think I'm finding that quite curious, because I can absolutely find myself going, okay, how do I help you navigate through this as well?
Mm-hmm.
And how much is this me responding to kind of an old pattern of my own about qualifications from school, perhaps? I don't know. Could be.
Yeah, well, exactly. And then one more thing, and then I will, Haley and Ashley, I'll stop and you guys can jump in. But Esther, the idea of the third person, yes, I never had thought about it that way, but I do find that, and sometimes that can be helpful to help us work through some of those things where I'm partnering with my child. Like sometimes there's external things that just don't make sense to us, at least. The process of even registering for this course was quite difficult. and strange. And I think the system I think they were under a bit of stress, and it was all a little bit unexpectedly, some twists and turns. And I think that my inclination is just to get kind of irritated and anti-system, and that's kind of where my brain goes. But yeah, thinking about that almost as a third party initially is irritating, but it was also a way for us to just partner, just kind of supporting her in, this third entity is difficult. We're trying to figure this out, but let's see what we can do, and let's see what we can sort of come up with in moving forward. So yeah, I like thinking about it that way. It really does feel like there's almost a third person there involved. Yeah.
What that makes me think about as well is that actually we get confronted with deschooling, I think, when there really are third people involved. We're recording this at the moment. I know it will go out in the new year, but we're recording this just before Christmas, and we've recently had an episode that's been released, the one that I sadly missed, about being intentional through the holidays. And I think that the times that we get together with extended family and friends, those are often the times that we can perhaps get a bit caught up in the comparison game and thinking about maybe getting ourselves tied up in knots, thinking about what other people's perceptions might be about what we're doing. And I think that those times can really pull us away sometimes from what how we really want to be showing up with our children, and how it can be easy to get kind of dragged off our little path of everything seems to be going fine, and then suddenly we're in this situation where we begin to start doubting ourselves perhaps, and beginning to worry more, getting more anxious, I guess, because we think other people might be judging us. And I think another thing that I was thinking about while you were talking was that the thing about perfection. My daughter and I were having a bit of a discussion, let's say, recently, and she was mentioning something that me and her dad weren't doing particularly well, and I said a bit flippantly, well, at least you don't have perfect parents. And she said, oh yeah, no, I don't. In a very in a very good-natured way, really. And we were talking about the fact that none of us are perfect, are we? None of us are ever going to be perfect, and we're all muddling on along, doing the best that we can. And if we were this mythically perfect, then that has implications for our children as well, because maybe then they'll feel like they could never match up to this idea of perfection. So it can be good, I guess, sometimes to stop and think that the fact that we're showing that we're doubting ourselves, that we're learning, that we're open to questioning, that we're curious, those are really good models for our children to know that it's okay not to know everything, to get things wrong, to make mistakes. Those, like you said, Esther, those are the times when those moments, those are the opportunities for growth, aren't they? And where we really, we learn so much.
I was just going to say, you reminded me of a couple things, Haley. One, well, maybe not even 2 years ago now. This wasn't my idea. I got this from somebody else who's doing it. Maybe might have been Fran from Big Mothering. I think she shared this. I don't know if it was her idea or not, but we started charting or graphing or recording. We did it in different ways when we would make mistakes. And it was all around this idea, for us anyway, the way we did it was we had been tracking our time outside, how many hours we had been spending outside, and we really enjoyed it at first. But then it became something that just wasn't feeling right anymore. And this other idea around tracking your mistakes for different reasons, but one being to kind of highlight and even celebrate when somebody makes, a mistake of any size. Sometimes they were like really tiny mistakes, and sometimes we'd have bigger discussions about larger mistakes. And we didn't do it for too long. It wasn't something that stuck with us for too long as far as actively practicing that. But I remember thinking at the time how valuable I hoped it was for my two, because I think it's hard for people of all ages, I guess, but maybe especially when kids are younger and vulnerable and trying to I think they feel that gaze from other people. And I know my two at times, one more than the other, but both of them didn't seem comfortable with making mistakes. And especially if it was a mistake that other people observed. So we've had, not recently really, but we've had a lot of conversations about, and funny conversations about how nobody's perfect and what would it be like if there was, the perfect person. But I love what you were saying there, Haley, about modeling, not just making mistakes, but just not knowing all the answers. And I'm often saying to my two, oh, I don't know, let's go look that up. And now they'll often just say, can you look this up? I'm asked that many times throughout the day. Can we look this up? Can you look this up for me? So I hope that helps them realize that, it's impossible to know everything. And then one other thing that came up for me that I wanted to highlight, Haley, I appreciated how you said how it's not easy, that it can be easy to, how did you put it? When you're on that deschooling path and maybe you're feeling good. And I know when it's just me and the kids, I can be like comfortable and even confident with what we're doing. But I learned, I want to say fairly early on when we started deschooling, that it was pretty easy. Like it surprised me how easy it was for me to, have a certain conversation with someone or an interaction or read something that would just really strip that confidence away. I really did. It surprised me how easy that happened and how, like 4 years later, that can still happen. But having that awareness that from my perspective, it doesn't take much for me to start to have that self-doubt come in. And I've come up with different, I know what works now, like having these conversations, listening to certain podcasts. I've shared this before, reading certain books gets me back into a place of feeling, okay, right. But it really is that third person in whatever form that comes. When it's just me and the two kids, we're pretty good. So yeah, it's interesting how that works.
Yeah. And something I've noticed, Haley, you were mentioning, this time of year, there are often maybe more opportunities for those conversations where you're maybe just aware of how you're answering questions, or, it's kind of people are reflecting on the year, asking what you're up to, what your kids are up to. Something that I've kind of taken note of, and I think it's because now that my kids are older, it's a little bit different because people aren't asking about homeschooling anymore. They're asking, what my kids are up to. And so then that's sometimes a conversation about what their kids are up to. And not always, but I noticed that actually, I think a lot of people have a bit of trepidation or hesitancy about how to answer those questions, because I think when kids are in school, that's kind of what people often talk about. They're in this grade and it can be kind of a contained conversation when you're talking with people who have their kids in school. But what I'm finding now is that people's kids are making maybe different decisions than they'd anticipated, or maybe they'll begin a degree and it's not for them, so they'll change paths, or they want to take a year off, or they want to travel, or they're not sure what they want to do, or they're in relationships that they thought would go a certain way and they don't. So there are kind of all these different pieces. And I think that there are actually many people, even outside of the homeschool world, who are having those same feelings. It's just probably that we've been aware of them for longer because, it's kind of those questions that you tend to get. But now I feel like I'm noticing that in my conversations with other people that, they're stumbling a little bit to, I don't even think it's necessarily self-consciousness or embarrassment. I think people also want those little sound bites. It's very hard to describe your kids and your kids' passions and what they're up to. And so I think other people find that too. And I think having kind of come through this homeschool path, sometimes it can actually make those conversations easier for people, because at times I've been able to be more understanding maybe than they maybe expected me to be. So they might be kind of saying, well, they started here and I think they're going to go back, but they're not. And, I can just hopefully offer a presence that shows that, you know, my interest in what their son or daughter or, you know, relative is doing is not about it being achievement oriented or them staying with the exact diploma they were going with. And I think it feels kind of freeing for people. So, you know, maybe there's something that we can even bring to the table in our conversations with people, but in kind of admitting our own, you know, wobbliness or trepidation sometimes, it just kind of creates a more authentic communication.
I think that's really interesting, Erin, because I've actually had that conversation with a few good friends quite recently, particularly children going to university, changing course, dropping out of university, that sort of thing. And I think you're absolutely right, because I found that they have received quite a lot of negative. I found that they blame themselves and they're quite hard on themselves sometimes. Whereas my thoughts around it are always, wow, that's great. This kid knows their mind. How wonderful that they've just tried something. And because we go through this all the time, we spent years trying things and going, do you know what, actually? And we celebrate the no as much as the yes now, because it's just as valuable. And I think, you know, a kid at 19 who said, do you know, chemistry is not for me? Well, I think that's to be celebrated. If chemistry is not for them, that's good to know that at 19. And so I always sort of, I absolutely hold that space for them. It's like, and I hear themselves giving themselves a hard time, but actually I think, well, you know, you've brought up this kid who knows their mind. What a great thing that is. But yeah, that's definitely something that I'm coming across, I guess, because my children are edging up to that age as well. So that's I think that's a really interesting observation.
I mean, it's such a powerful idea that you have to finish what you've started is definitely one of those entrenched beliefs, I think, that I know for me, definitely, that I've had to do some deschooling around. And the idea that if you're going to do something, then you've got to do it well. That kind of, that can, again, coming back to perfectionism, those things can limit us so much in life, can't they? The fact that, you know, we end up spending years procrastinating about things because we don't think that we could do them as well, you know, as well. There are always going to be people who could do things better than us. So if we are stuck in that thinking, then that can hold us back from so many things. And I think, hopefully that the deschooling that we're doing, hopefully our children aren't going to be held back by those same beliefs in the same way that perhaps we might feel that we are sometimes. So that you can see why people would think, oh, you know, stopping mid-year and changing your major or just you know, deciding to leave a college course or leaving a job or whatever, that, you know, that can be very powerful for people if they're, you know, if they are, you know, dealing very much with that voice in their head that's saying that you have to finish what you've started. That's tough, isn't it?
I think all the things that you have to do and that you should do, and I've been reading a lot about this recently in the context of nonviolent communication, and this idea that every time that we're doing something because we are obliged to, we're told to, it's the thing we have to do, we're really disconnecting from the joy of doing the things that we're made to do. And so I'm watching my children now, and I'm noticing when they do something because they want to, even if it's really challenging, it's filled with joy and life. They do something because they feel they should. It's not. It's sort of, you know, it's like tired and resistant and nobody enjoys it. And you think, oh, that doesn't really have much value to it. So I think that, Hayley, exactly. We're conditioned to believe we've got to do things even if we don't want to. But I'm not sure we bring anything to the world when we do that. They're probably not ours to do, you know. Maybe someone else should be doing that thing, or, you know, I've come to see all of this as just this constant reconnecting with ourselves, the constant going back to who am I? This is what all the voices say, but who am I?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it even
sorry, go ahead.
Go on, Erin.
No, go ahead, Haley. My thought is only half formed. So go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking about the messages we receive as children. I'm thinking, it just popped into my head really, the thing about children in a classroom. Hopefully this doesn't happen as much as it did when I was at school, but the idea that you can't just go to the toilet when you want to, and you can't just have a drink when you want to, and things like that. A lot of the deschooling that we're doing, we have to go a bit easy on ourselves and remember that so much of this is from so long ago, from the kind of beliefs and ideas that we have in our heads. A lot of them are formed when we're so little that we've really got to be kind to ourselves about this, because those times when maybe we were told that we couldn't go to the toilet when we needed it, or we couldn't have a drink, those messages are kind of disconnecting us from our inner from our inner knowing, that they're disconnecting us from what we need as humans. And we begin, if we then start shutting those things down, it can take a long time for us to open them up again and to be able to trust what our body's telling us, and and to be able to listen into those messages that actually are there designed to keep us safe and healthy. And so it's I think it just the message of being kind to ourselves is really important, isn't it? Because these are long entrenched conditioning that we've been exposed to, like you were saying, Esther.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that I've noticed for myself, and I've heard other people say this, that to be easy on ourselves as well, that those feelings, so the word that comes up for me sometimes is resentment, because if I'm honest with myself, right, and then I want to reflect on that and I want to work through that, but when I see my child having a lot of freedom and making decisions, and then actually feeling free even from the outcome, because they know they're going to be unconditionally loved anyway. There's no, because I think sometimes many of us kind of coming up through systems, not that we wouldn't have been unconditionally loved or accepted if we hadn't passed a certain course, but for some reason there was a feeling that there was this feeling that this must be passed, this exam must be passed, and it must be passed by this particular time, and you must get this mark, or you'll miss the opportunity to apply here or to learn this skill or whatever. And so to just watch our kids in their own skin feeling, relaxed, and not that they don't have some things to work through, but relaxed and free, and I guess just so self-aware. And so we use the word entitled, often it's negatively. So I'm not sure entitled is the word I'm looking for, but just so able to understand that they can have a range of options, and that's fine. They can do that. And I think when we've come up not having those, for me, there are sometimes I can feel like a line in my head that will say, oh my gosh, you have no idea. or if things are, I'm a little tired and I'm not very resourced, or there's a bit of friction around something, it can really feel like just almost a resentment that they kind of have this life, even though I wouldn't trade it. And even though I've seen that they do work hard, and they do pursue things they're interested in, and they are kind to people, and they are considerate people. Those voices of, if we don't make them do this the way I was made to do it, what might happen? Even when I'm watching proof right there that they're a responsible person, there's something a little bit that niggles at me that they didn't have to jump those hoops to become a responsible person. And that's kind of hard to feel about your own child. But I do hear that from people, that these pieces pop up. So I don't think, and I think I hear it even when I've had conversations with people who have younger children, but I do find as kids get older, it's even a little bit more that way. I think when we think about ourselves when we're young, we do remember, play and things like that. But those stakes feel higher, I think, as you get older and you get into the higher ages. But yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I feel like I have a lot of unformed thoughts around this, but as I'm listening, I'm just thinking about how much time I spend thinking about these things in regards to my kids, but then of myself as well. So the deschooling process, just how much I have to think back to what my experiences were growing up in my home and at school, and how, all those messages that I received around what makes me a good person and what makes me valuable. And I know the word or the like people talk about being a people pleaser now. And I still see so much of that messaging that adults are now still giving children around not that you would necessarily say put other people's feelings ahead of your own, but that type of messaging around, well, how did you make that other person feel? And if you do this, how do you think they'll feel? And all the messages even around kindness. And I'm not saying that there's not value in that. And that, of course, we want our children to be kind, but I think it comes like, I want to trust that my children are kind naturally, and that when they are in a place where they can show kindness, they will. But I don't want to be sending them the message to be kind to others, be kind, because I feel like it comes from that place of fear of, oh my gosh, are they going to go out in the world and not be kind to others? Because of course we want all of our family members to be kind people, but I want to trust that they are. But that doesn't, going back to being perfect, they're not always going to be the most kind person every single day, and that's okay. And I think what we really need as children is more encouragement around how to be kind to yourself, and how to take care of yourself, and how to take care of all those big emotions that do and will continue to come up for you. Because I think when we feel that we can be kind to ourselves and that we expect other people to be kind to us and help care for us, then we'll be in a place more often where we can be kind to others. So that kindness piece is coming up, but there's more of what I was thinking about when you guys were talking about, what does it mean to be a good person? Because and kindness was one for me. That was a big one for me. The message I got for whatever reason was, how can I be kind to other people? But it comes up in other ways too around, I look at what our children see is celebrated from other kids, right? Like in or outside of school, the kids, because our kids are so observant, they notice, right? When there's certain kids who are often praised or celebrated for not causing any trouble or getting good marks or always being kind to others. And then you've got some of those kids who, maybe they're just different, and they just have different struggles, and they show up in different ways, but it's not celebrated as much. So I go back to that a lot, around the messages that we intend, but also don't intend to give to our kids, and how they do, as we're talking today, we carry that with us into adulthood. Like it has such an impact that really lasts with them. And I can say that with so much confidence, because just as like that's been my experience as a human being. It's so easy for me to feel and think about, and maybe because I've practiced deschooling for a number of years now, that's helped me have that time to reflect and realize that. But that's the type of stuff that helps me try to keep in mind the messaging especially the messaging that I'm sending my kids, or that others are sending the kids, and we don't even realize we're doing it. And just taking the time to think about all of that. Sorry, that was a bit of a ramble, as I usually go on.
I think the self-compassion piece is absolutely huge. I was laughing with someone the other day. It was my last podcast guest, about how we both sort of come across the word self-compassion a few years and go, oh, who would have known? But like, oh, this is a thing. being nice to ourselves, you know, and now I've understood that it is at the core of everything, really, in that and I practice it a lot, and I make sure that I don't give myself a hard time if I get something wrong, and I certainly wouldn't in front of my children show them that I'm giving myself a hard time, because I think a lot of this is how would I like my children to live as adults, not what do I want my child to do now to make life comfortable for me and to please the rest of the world. How do I want my daughter to be at the age of 20, 30, 40, 50? I want her to be able to say no. I want her to be able to have a walk if she needs to have a walk. I want her to be able to take a day off work if she has to, if she doesn't feel well. Do you know what I mean? I want her to value herself. And I think the only way to get that message through is by really valuing ourselves, and showing them that you can do that. And then I was just thinking about, oh yeah, the kindness piece again. Something I've observed a lot is when someone is obliged to be kind, it is not the same thing as a kindness that just comes from the heart because we want to be kind. And we do mostly want to be kind. We want other people to feel good. I think that's the natural state of a human being. So I think for our children, if our children feel safe and they feel loved and they don't feel competitive with everyone, they don't feel like they have to be the winner, there's just so much more space for kindness. You know, if I was to say to one of my children, okay, I really need one of you to do this in a kind of a cross voice, they would do it, but there'd be an edge to it all. If I expressed a need that I need help because I'm feeling a bit tired, or I tell them how I am, they'll leap up and they'll do it with a lot of love because that's what they want to do. So I think, again, it's just giving them that space and that trust. And all of us being kind to all of us, including to ourselves, in whatever way that looks for us, you know, it will look very different, won't it, for all of us?
Yeah, I'm curious. Something that I notice is my kids are often a really good barometer for me around, like sometimes I have that feeling in my body and I'm cluing in pretty quickly, but other times their responses or their body language will give me a pretty good clue around, just how conscious or intentional I'm being around something. You know, and sometimes I will see them, one of my kids in particular, I'll notice, I can tell it's not feeling comfortable for him, but he's trying to find a way to sort of do it to please me, but then he's also trying to decide if it's okay to say no. And, you know, that's a clue for me about how he sees me or about what my intentions are and whether my words actually have been matching how I've really been feeling. So I do find it interesting to watch the way my different kids react to things, whether it's a request, whether it's a comment, because they're all so different, right? And so I think I had, you know, one child in particular where that was always really clear how he was feeling. He processed externally. If I asked something that wasn't a fit, that would be made pretty clear to me. And so I didn't have to do as much reflecting about it because it was this very, very direct back and forth. But then sometimes kids are maybe those easier going personalities. And so I think it was you, Ashley, maybe talked about like our kids doing things that are easy for us or for people, you know, that kind of concept, I guess, of well-behaved. And I've had to look more carefully, I think, at my intention with him because, you can just see the wheels turning a little bit more because I don't think that easygoing necessarily means that they don't still have a good sense of themselves, that they don't, they're not self-aware and don't have that self-determination. It just doesn't come up quite as quickly or as reactively, maybe. So, I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that, but I'm always just interested in watching those little clues that say to me, oh, this is feeling coercive to them right now, or this is feeling manipulative to them right now. And my words didn't necessarily intend this, but this is, or I didn't necessarily intend this with my words, but this is the energy that's kind of developing.
Yeah, I do want to just quickly say, because what's coming up for me, Erin, is I'm thinking about my youngest, because my oldest is more like what you were just describing with your one kid. Like I can kind of see, I can kind of tell just by watching the external processing happening, and it's really helpful. Like all the clues are there, and I can kind of like adjust and see what's, what impact I'm having. But my youngest is more the way I think I am and the way I was as a kid. And that brings me a different set of worries, I guess, of the impact that that's having, because my youngest is just more likely to, like, he'd be described as easygoing. And, if I ask him, or I'll make a comment like, oh, you've been watching this morning, I said, oh, you've been watching YouTube for a long time. I wonder how you're feeling, because he'll often say, oh, I'm so tired and I don't feel like getting up. And we've talked about how, well, when we sit around for a long time, just kind of passively watching something, how that makes us feel. So I just said, I've noticed you've been watching YouTube for quite a while this morning. And he just easygoing, just, oh, yeah, okay, and shut it off and jumped up and moved along. And he often does things like that where I just think that was almost too easy from like the parent perspective, right? Because my eldest is not like that. So I have that comparison. But I do have this, I think that's what I was like. And, 10 years ago, I would have described my childhood as good and wonderful and fine. And I was raised in an environment that really allowed me to, feel comfortable who I am as an adult. And I don't necessarily disagree with that now, but I'm more critical, I guess, of how my easygoingness and I look back and I think, oh, I wish I had have had someone encouraging me to listen to my inner voice more. And I think that maybe didn't happen. I mean, who knows? But maybe it didn't happen because I was just that kind of easygoing kid who naturally just wanted to make sure whatever I was doing was good with everybody else. So I'm not saying, one way's, and I don't think any of us are saying one way's good or bad or anything like that, but just taking the time. I've been taking the time to really think about just how my kids naturally are, like their natural personalities, and then how I am with them and the impact that that might have. Because I think sometimes it's easy I'll just speak for myself, like my youngest, just more easygoing. It'd be kind of easy for me to not think about it too much or put too much thought into it. But I want to make sure I'm, not having too much of a negative impact on them. That's not how I want to put it, but I know you guys know what I mean.
I'm wondering too if, so something that's kind of coming up for me is if we're looking at it in the context of unschooling. And there can be this thought, I know, I think early on, especially, that it's almost like people want to get it right. And so again, there's a little bit of an irony to it. And that it, some people, especially early on, are feeling maybe they can't make too many suggestions, or it has to be yes all the time, or, they kind of need to be in a place where, they let all sorts of things go. And then sometimes it feels like a lot for people. And so then the tendency can be to kind of get a grip again and claw things back again. And it can feel like a bit of a back and forth. And I wonder sometimes if people didn't come into it feeling like it's kind of an all or nothing thing, if it might be a gentler and easier process for people, because I do think that maybe people are thinking, well, school is this, so we kind of need to do the opposite to this. And it can involve a lot of quick kind of letting go or tossing things to the side. And, I think about that a little bit too, that there's kind of this, I think people can feel some pressure in the unschooling community about, deschooling. And, I know sometimes there can be a feeling like if people are struggling in a certain area, whether that is, certainly kind of screen time is one that comes up a lot. But, other things even around maybe being nervous that their child's not reading, or, all the different things that people are working through and figuring out. Maybe they're feeling at times that there's a bit of an external, unschool police that's kind of saying, oh, you just haven't deschooled enough. You haven't let go enough. You haven't let go enough. And it can be, I think it can be hard, because then they're sort of wrestling between maybe two sides of themselves, one that wants to really embrace this way of being, and another that's still, it has years in the making of seeing things a certain way. And I also think it can be difficult for us to differentiate between, our intuition as a parent, and maybe there is some work that we need to work through, but that can be a fine line at times to figure out. So I guess that's just something I think about as well, is people thinking that they need to have this perfection in deschooling, and that deschooling is sort of this continuum that the longer that you're at it, the more deschooled you become. And on the one hand, I think there's some truth to that. Like, I've found there's some truth to that. But on the other hand, I find that each new life stage, and even each child with each life stage, just brings stuff up for me. Like even this course that I'm talking about, I have a couple of other guys who did the same course as a prerequisite for something. And it was a completely different experience, because they were literally checking a box. They wanted to do this, they needed a prerequisite. And so they just kind of like, buckled down and got it done. So my support in their process with that looked a certain way. It was very much maybe the way, Esther, you described that third person. It was like, okay, let's look at what's needed here. What's your time like? And kind of, they just kind of powered through it. It's a whole new experience for my daughter, who is absolutely enjoying this course. And so she is working hours on things that are worth, so in my brain, not that much, right? Like not that much percentage. And she's aware of that, but she's so interested in the assignments that she's like dipping into them. My guys weren't that marks concerned. I mean, they wanted a decent enough mark to be able to meet their goal. But she's been really interested in, like the one assignment, she got quite a good mark, but not, she was reading the teacher's comments and feeling a little bit misunderstood. I don't think that my guys cared that much. It was a good mark. They just wanted to move on. They weren't going to get into conversation with the teacher about it. And then this last assignment, which is the one I kind of started writing about that I was telling you all about, she got a fantastic mark. Like I think the teacher probably found a way to bring her down from 100, because it was really good. And she's really pleased about that. So I'm kind of navigating this, she kind of comes running in to tell me her mark. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. Because I'd sort of figured out how to navigate checking the box to get these credits for a larger goal. But this is a whole different experience to have somebody so immersed in this kind of more traditional way of learning. And it's all good and it's all interesting, but it's just, where was I even going with this? I think I was talking about the fact that deschooling, it's like each day still seems to be a new adventure. And yeah. So
if I could jump in there, Erin, I was thinking like the thing about the word unschooling, I use the word a lot because it's kind of a shorthand. We all know what we're talking about, but I think it can be a problematic as well, particularly when people get dogmatic about it and like, this is what it is. And I would almost encourage people to get rid of the label, like just throw that out and just see, okay, how do we best live? Just think, how do we all live most happily? And that's probably a really good starting point as to, are we supposed to do screens? Are we not? And then what you were describing there, I think is lovely because it just shows really the heart of all this is that we're all so different. and we're navigating relationships is what we're actually doing. I think we're all just trying to hold our children in a way that that child thrives at that moment, and that we can help them really just be there to support them kind of moving through life in a way that is meaningful to them. So your daughter has found incredible meaning in something that your other children didn't find much meaning in. They kind of had to tick that box. So I just think it's so interesting, because that to me is what unschooling is. It's this living with other human beings that are not you, function in an entirely different way from you, and trying to hold them in their kind of wholeness as themselves and accompanying that. And just, there are no recipes for that, are there? There's no, okay, here's how you do that, except keep checking your own reactions. That'd probably be the only, keep checking your own responses. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I was thinking about, when we feel it in the body, is something I'm very aware of. When I am, when you think you need to sort of help someone, so you feel something's needed from you, can't quite tell what. So you have a little go, and then it's clear you've got it wrong. So you pull back, okay, wasn't that? That's fine. And then you maybe try something else. I always feel that, I just feel it doesn't matter which child it is, they're all very different, but I feel it as resistance. I can feel that suddenly it sounds resistance. The thing I'm saying sounds silly. I can see it's not landing. It doesn't sound helpful. And all I can tell is that in that moment, this isn't quite right. And so then I'll pull back. And I think it's that. And then when everything is really, even in a difficult conversation, there can be flow, because we're understanding each other's needs and emotions. And there can be flow even in a challenging situation. And there can be resistance in quite a joyful situation. So it's that, have we understood each other? Am I understanding your needs right now? Or am I getting it completely wrong? And if I do, I say, I'm sorry, I got that completely wrong. And then they let me try again. So I think it's just so, you're absolutely right. It's moment by moment. It's life unfolding, isn't it, really? And us kind of trying to keep up with it.
Well, it is. And I think that reminds me of that intention piece that our kids, I find, are pretty, most of the time, pretty open to us having those missteps. If they're feeling like, most of the time they know that we're trying to listen, that we're trying to understand, that even if we can't do something in the moment, we're still considering that. And so those are those pieces where I think that longevity, that sort of consistent relationship where they know that the relationship is important and that their wishes are important. And excuse me, yes, we have those moments where, tension is a really good word for it. You can just kind of feel that in the air, like this isn't quite landing. And that there's space for that, if things do kind of go off kilter, there's space for that repair. There's space to have that conversation. And, even that though, I have one kid who has said to me, you apologize to, I know you're sorry. You don't need to apologize. And so even then you're trying to get, like, it really is a dance, I find, because you're, we are so complex as humans. We are so complex. And so I think that when we come into this and we're reading and we're maybe listening to podcasts and trying to understand about kind of how to move forward in these relationships, as though there's a formula. And it's just it's disappointing at times that there isn't, but there isn't. And it's also beautiful because we just have to keep it's kind of like every day is a new piece of work to navigate communication with one another. And I think for me, once I recognized that, it just made that piece of it easier. It didn't feel so distressful that I had messed up. I still, if I say something that I feel is hurtful, or I feel like, I struggle with that. I don't like, none of us like that feeling, but I think understanding the complexity of these relationships and that is going to happen. But there is room for that conversation, and that repair is really helpful. The other thing, sorry, go ahead. Haley? Yeah.
No, you carry on. You carry on, Erin. Don't.
No, okay, no, I was just gonna say too, this idea of like the imperfect thing. I think so many people come to, whether it's homeschooling or unschooling, with that schooled mindset of, let me find out how this works. So here are the rules. And, a lot of times, it's something like say yes more, or, all these different things, but often they're quite out of context, aren't they? And so then I think there's that potential to maybe get a little bit resentful of whoever gave us this information, because it's not quite working this way with our child. And I've had moments of that as my kids have gotten older, because I think my initial messaging was, and I don't know how much of this was my own way of interpreting it, right? But I think our tendency is to blame the person who gave us the information. But this idea that, we would kind of live this way and we would have this life of freedom, but that somehow it would still wrap around to all the same traditional milestones, right? At the end of those 20 years or whatever, when in fact, kids who have had time, excuse me, with multi-ages and lots of different opportunities, often don't make conventional choices. And so, yeah, I don't know, even the struggle that we had accessing this course, I had moments of irritation with, all the early blogs that said, oh yes, all the places will be dying to have your children come, all that messaging. And I'm like, well, that's not what I'm experiencing right now. But that's that very schooled way of thinking again. Like, this is what they told me, would happen about this way of living and learning. And it's not quite working out this way. So there's even some tension there, I think, around, the kind of unschooling culture, homeschooling culture. But sorry, Haley, go ahead.
Well, just what I was thinking when you were talking was about how two things can be true at the same time. Two seemingly opposite things can be true at the same time. I think quite a while back, Erin, you said something about you feel like as you go on, deschooling should become easier. But then on the other hand, you're faced with more and more situations that are causing you to I don't mean you, but us, we're faced with new things all the time, aren't we? As our children change and as we change and as people get older, and that there are always new things. And it's almost that idea of peeling back different layers. And I think also the thing that I was thinking as well was around the idea of certainty. And the more we're kind of certain that one way is the right, or one thing is the right thing to do, then that can pull us away from the kind of vastness of possibilities that there might be, really, that there, we can, if we get too sure that this is the right thing to do, then we can miss so many other good things that might have come out. And I guess the other thing that I was thinking was, I'm sure it's true that it's often said about the fact that deschooling is much more for us, the parents. So that's kind of one thing that's true. But then there's also the truth that alongside that, having faith and confidence and trust in our children can help make that easier, I guess. What I'm saying, the fact that if we can recognize that our children are already coming, we all know, don't we? We all know that our children are not a product entirely of us. They are not, they don't come out as carbon copies of us, and they're not, we don't fill them up with all our stuff. Obviously we are, we have a very powerful influence on them, but they have so many skills and so much knowledge that we don't know, none of us know what's going on inside other people's minds. And remembering that, I think, in these times where we think we need to know what the right thing to do is, remembering that, if we can look to them and remember that they also have so much that they're bringing to whatever the situation is, and their own inner wisdom and stuff, that can make things, take the pressure off us. I guess that's what I'm thinking about. because we can get lost sometimes in tying ourselves up in knots. Again, we're coming back to the perfectionism, I guess, aren't we? And thinking that there is one right way to go, and remembering, I guess, that there are so many ways to see any situation can be seen from so many different angles, and you know, that it's difficult for all of us to remember that sometimes, because we can get entrenched, especially if we're feeling worried and anxious about something. We can get sort of stuck on that track of not remembering that actually, yeah, somebody else might come across this situation and see it in a completely different way.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of the things that I love about Esther. I'm sure it was you that I heard the term unraveling. And I don't know if that's natural, like if you just sort of said that, but it really stuck with me. Because as you said, I think we can get really caught in the language around, you know, unschooling and deschooling are two sort of words that we hear a lot. But, you know, I think this idea of unraveling, it's so much more expansive, because we can think about that beyond the school years. We can think about it in our interactions with people who have been choosing school. Like it's not so partnered with the idea of school. It's just this idea for me. I don't know exactly what your definition is, but when I read, I think it was maybe an Instagram post, it just felt so much bigger and freer to me than being tied to this kind of concept of school. And that's really kind of helped me as well. Just think like it's because I think when we think of deschooling, we're thinking of the school years. And so you kind of have to get this done and do this work. And when you think about it as unraveling, it feels just like a lifetime that we can do that with.
Yeah, I think it's just also that's a really lovely conclusion to come to, isn't it? When you go, oh, this is about life. This isn't just about school, which I'm sure we've all had that moment where we've gone, oh, yeah, okay, this is so much bigger. You know, I think going back to what you were saying earlier, Aaron, about people jumping in and then finding, okay, we're saying yes to everything and it's all too much. Or I think it's really important to go gently, you know, to unravel gently as at the speed that you can go at, and with a lot of self-compassion, because I think it is deep work, and it can have you questioning a lot of things. And so I think it's really important to, when you find, you know, you bump into an edge, it's okay, stay there for a little while until you're over that edge, you know, move through it in whatever way. Yeah, and go at that pace that feels okay. The other thing about the yes, which I find really interesting, the idea of you say yes to your children. I think it's a really interesting idea, but I think it's totally off target, because it's consent. You know, sometimes you ought to shake people, say, this is consent, folks. I'm not going to say yes unless it's a yes. I want my children to see that I say yes when it's a yes, and I say no when it's a no. And that's been a real learning piece for me. But my children are well versed in yeses and nos now. And so if I say yes to something and it's not a full yes because I'm tired or I'm, you know, busy, they know it's not a full yes. And they'll say, no, it's okay. No worries. Later. They won't have me. I'm not welcome. I'm not welcome unless it's a full, actual, true consent. And I think that's really valuable. And this idea of, okay, just, you know, work yourself to the bone, give everything, never say no. I think that's really misleading to our children. Our children need to know when to feel into their own no as well and be able to say that. And I've noticed that when I say no to things, people don't mind, because they understand I've said no because I've thought about it. I don't just go, oh no, you know, it's a thoughtful no. Or we might go, okay, yeah, but it can happen tomorrow, or, you know, it's not a no, that's it forever. So I think it's really important that people feel into the no and the yes themselves, as kind of the base part of the base work of it. Do you know what I mean? As they are, let's say, unraveling. If it feels really uncomfortable for them, whatever they're tempted, then maybe that's not quite right yet. But I do think as you go on, something does get easier, which is you keep seeing proof that everything is okay, and you gain in confidence because your children are doing these things just the way they are as humans, the way they're talking, the way things that they're doing, you see that actually, yeah, they are thriving in so many ways. So I think for me, although I have my wobbles sometimes, that just because I know how steady they are as themselves, I catch myself on things, but they don't go very deep with things anymore because I see what solid people they are. But yeah, no, I just wanted to address that yes, no piece and that, yeah, unraveling gently, very important.
I feel like that's a brilliant way to put it, actually, Esther, because I feel that I feel that what you're saying, and I don't know that I've ever kind of been able to articulate it that way. But yes, that kind of idea of just saying yes to everything, it feels, it maybe feels inauthentic, I think. And maybe at first it doesn't. Like maybe it's a little bit of a portal into working with your, maybe because traditionally or conventionally there's been this idea of not saying yes too much or whatever. So maybe it's a little bit of a way, kind of a portal into a different way of being. But I think if you have a very authentic relationship with your child already, it does start, you're right. They know when those are only like semi yeses, or they are resistant yeses, or the yes might kind of push you over the edge. Sometimes our kids get to know us better than we know ourselves around that kind of thing. And I just really love the way that, yeah, kind of you bringing that up and saying it that way. And I'm thinking of the conversation, we had a conversation with Missy Willis about tech, like screen time technology. And I think it was in that conversation that we talked about this idea that we don't have to have it all figured out. Like, not only do we not have to have it all figured out from like a parenting or an unschooling perspective, it's okay for our kids to know that we don't have things figured out. So, you know, a request for something, or whether it's, you know, getting something or going somewhere, it's okay for us to not be sure, or to even that going back and forth. I think if we are honest about it, we can say, you know what, I thought I was feeling comfortable with this. There's something that's not kind of catching me the right way about this. So, you know, I'd like to rediscuss this or reevaluate. Or the other way, you know, I've certainly had lots of things where my kids were interested in something and I was unsure or resistant. I mean, this happened a lot on the online world, for sure. This happens, or going out and doing things and you're just not quite sure. And I've kind of moved forward carefully and then maybe a step back. And I've had conversations with the kids where I've said, you know, I really was much more worried about this than I needed to be. And I see that now. And, you know, thank you for kind of helping me understand that. And those are all just conversations that help our kids understand that the parent is not somebody that is the knower of all the things or professes to be, right? So just leaving that space. And I guess, Esther, your wording about unraveling gently, you know, that for me, that's an example of how that can play out for me, is not having to have the answers all the time, taking that moment to say, I don't know, or being able to backpedal a little bit if I've jumped too far forward. And I think that's all part of this idea that we just don't need to get it right away all the time. Maybe there's not even a right, because I think even those moments where I was a little bit resistant to kind of have my kids move forward with something, sure, I could see that as having hangups, or maybe somebody might say, oh, you know, you weren't deschooled enough in this area, or you were too uptight. But I don't know. I think if my kids can see that consistently it's coming from a place of me just wanting the best for them, right? And just really kind of trying to make sure that I kind of have the information that I need. I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think sometimes in circles, that idea can be that that's a bad thing. But I haven't found that that has bred resentment. I'm not sure what my wording is there. Sometimes they'll laugh about things a little bit, like, remember when you were uncomfortable with this game or whatever. But it comes back to that intention. Like, they know what my intention was. So, yeah. Yeah. Ashley, I don't know if you find that. I know your kids are a little bit younger and we've kind of been talking a little bit more about some of the older ages, but I don't know if that resonates at all with your guys.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think this is actually helpful for all parents to think about this thing. But just listening to you guys talk, I was thinking about how valuable it is for home educating parents or unschooling parents to hear, because I think sometimes, or maybe often, as home educating parents, we feel a lot of pressure, maybe and maybe all along, or maybe more in the earlier years, or at just different times, we feel a lot of pressure to say yes a lot and to be all the things for our kids because we are with them a lot. And I know everybody home educates differently. So some people like outsource more and stuff too. But I know I've had to have talks with myself about not saying yes when it's not a yes. And you know what that looks like. And I've had conversations with the kids about it. And one thing I often catch myself saying for quite some time now is something along the lines of, mama doesn't want to say no. Like I'm trying to, I want them to understand or see that intention behind it. I'm not one to just say no for no reason. And talk about it. And I don't know if it's because they're younger and, they just want to watch this show so badly and they just want me to say yes. And it's not that I don't trust that they know what's best for them, but they just don't. It's a show they haven't seen yet. It's a show I haven't seen yet. So I just say, I need some time to look into this before I just say yes, but I don't know what is in this show, just as an example. I mean, it could be a game, could be anything. Right now, there's a couple shows that they're asking for, and it's a no right now. And it might stay no for a while, but we have conversations about it and they're not afraid to continue to ask for it. And they'll say things like, well, they'll say, can you watch it and then decide, or can you look into it and see if it's appropriate and if it's okay. But I think, yeah, and then there's other ways. Like I like what you were saying, Esther, about the consent piece. I want to model that because going back to what you were saying a while ago too, I think like our kids really do kind of they don't become us. They're their own person still. But I think, we feel it. I know I do certain things where I go, oh, that's a lot like my mom, or that was a lot like my dad, because that modeling is so powerful, right? When the people that we admire and the people we look up to and the people we trust, like really our parents, for a lot of us, they're our role models, whether we like it or not. We learn so much from them. So I do think I definitely want my kids to be able to say no to other people, and to realize that when they say no to something, that leaves space for them to be saying yes to something else, whether it's yes to somebody else or yes to themselves. Yeah, and then Aaron, like what you were kind of saying, it is complex, right? Like all of it, we're also different, and then the relationships are also unique. But it's really helpful for me to hear from people who have older children, because I think, yeah, mine are 10 and 7, and some days it feels like we've kind of been doing this for quite a while. But for the most part, I feel like we're still so much at the beginning, and I feel like they're still so young. So it's interesting for me to hear maybe how what we're doing now, even though sometimes it feels hard, will have a positive impact now and later, but how it doesn't necessarily just make the future super easy. Like it's an ongoing thing, it's an ongoing practice, and it just makes sense because, yeah, we're all just in relationship with one another and we're all our own unique person. So, yeah, I find these conversations are very valuable, and I have to have them often enough. I don't just have this conversation or these types of conversations once and then I'm good. Like I have to keep coming back to it. That's a big part of what helps me. That's the support, I guess, that I need to, feel confident in making all those decisions and just keeping me on the path that feels right. Is hearing from others. So, yeah.
It's I think for people with younger children, and I'd be interested if Erin and Haley see it like this too. I feel like you take away some kind of certainty, which is a bit of an illusion anyway, but so we take that away. But what you get are people who are very equipped to navigate their own lives because they're very equipped to check in with themselves and go, oh yeah, this feels right. This is a no. This is a yes. This place feels good for me. No, it doesn't. This course is a fit. Feels really meaningful. Oh, no, it doesn't. And I see people who will be incredibly well resourced to navigate their own lives, whatever that may look like. And I haven't got a clue what that will look like. But I have an awful lot of confidence in their ability because they've had so much time and so much ability to do that as 10-year-olds, as 7-year-olds. And so I don't like that space. I don't want to go there. I do want to go there. Do you know what I mean? It really, as people, I think, are very wise and quite connected. I don't know if Erin and Haley, if that's your feeling.
Yeah, I do definitely, Esther. I feel the same way, and I think the whole thing about self-compassion, you mentioned it before, didn't you? That by us being able to model the kind of deschooling process and the making mistakes and the having self-compassion and all that means for them, I think, that when they do make mistakes or when they, because it's one thing knowing something, but it's a different thing always being able to do that thing, I guess. And as much as we know that that deschooling is great and that we should be questioning our assumptions, we can't always do that. For instance, if we're tired or we're in pain or we've got lots of other things going on, and for our children to see that I guess again it's like that thing about making mistakes and when we get things wrong, it's an opportunity rather than you either I've forgotten what the saying is now. It's either and it's a good experience or you learn something. I can't remember. You know what I mean, don't you? I can't think of the right phrase, but I think I see that in my children, I guess. I'm thinking, when they make mistakes, they're not spending the same amount of time that I am beating themselves up. I guess that's what I'm getting to. I think that is a powerful thing to see, and they're more in tune with their own needs. So we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but things like, for me, sitting and reading a novel in the middle of the day still feels a bit naughty. I feel guilty. I feel like, kind of almost like taking care of myself is something that I should be doing that last. That shouldn't be the first thing on my list. Whereas I want the opposite for my children. I want them to feel like that because we talked about kindness earlier. I think in order to be able to be kind to other people, you need to have resources. You need to have been kind enough to yourself and had the experience of other people being kind to you to be able to then give that to other people. So I think that's a really powerful thing that I've noticed and that I love, is that my children have I guess I feel they're more in touch with their own needs and are confident about kind of taking the time to meet those or asking for help if they need it, than perhaps comes natural to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we often reflect about this, don't we? Like how amazing it is that as different as we are as human beings, there's so much commonality sometimes to our experiences, because Esther and Haley, like I just relate to so much to what both of you said, and being witness to that, like being witness to people who do value themselves in a way that maybe, I mean, I don't think it's that we don't value ourselves, but you know what I mean, that they don't have to struggle through, work through a bunch of shoulds to sit down and read that novel, or to leave a job where they're not being treated well, or a relationship where they're not, they just don't have to do, I don't think, my experience is quite the same mental gymnastics to take care of themselves. And it doesn't mean that there aren't still a lot of things to think about and a lot of things to process when they're making these decisions. But it's somehow, I've noticed it's just different. Their sense of self is really quite different. And then the challenge for us as parents really is very great to see that, to honor it, to value it, to validate it, actually is the word I was looking for there. Because I think many of us are really working in a paradigm that we didn't grow up with. So I think back to that idea, Esther, of being gentle with ourselves. I think for many of us, and it's probably why there is so much writing and community kind of in this home education world, like you're saying, Ashley, go back to those. I almost picture it like an anchor when you're just describing that. We really do need each other, I think, to go back and listen to those words and read those words and connect with one another. Because it's a whole different paradigm is the word that keeps coming to my mind, but it's a different thing to support. And there's nobody I've heard this said a lot. The responsibility that we take on, I think, is not to be understated. So I've often heard people say this, I couldn't take my kids out of school. I wouldn't know what I was doing. And then almost like there's nobody to blame if things don't go well. And I definitely feel that, as my kids get older, it's like, there's so much excitement and joy. And there's also this sense of it's almost like the weight of responsibility has hit me now, almost a little bit harder. It was like, whoo, that was a lot, if that makes sense. It just, So anyway, I might've taken that in a whole different direction, Esther, but I really appreciated what you said there. That was, definitely. So we've covered a lot. I'm just kind of aware of our time. Is there anything else that is kind of jumping out for anybody before we sign off today? No, we're good. Okay. Yeah. I really enjoyed this topic, and I really, it was just interesting. Some of the things that came up that I hadn't considered at all. So I always appreciate that part of it as well. And Esther, thank you so much for connecting and connecting short notice. It just was really a nice spontaneous thing to have you be able to join us today. So I'll make sure to link at the bottom of the episode where people can find you and all the things that you have to offer, because you have a podcast and a blog, and I know some parenting workshops as well. So, and I think everything is sort of under the umbrella of, do you want, I'll link, but why don't you tell me now as well, and then people can.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Erin. Well, thank you so much. It's been absolutely lovely talking with you all. So my website is esther-jones.com, and the blog, the podcast, and workshops, all there.
All right there. Perfect. Okay. All right. Really nice to see you all today. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And this ends our conversation today. We hope you found it interesting and maybe helpful. If you'd like to connect further or see additional content, Haley can be found on the web and on Instagram at Taking a Kinder Path. Erin can be found at Everlearning. And I, Ashley, can be found on Instagram at AshleyAsMama and at Storytime Shelves. We'd be very grateful if you'd share this conversation with anyone you think might appreciate it. Thank you for your time today.